About 3 years prior to the 1993 Lucasville Riot, a 32-year-old female prison teacher by the name of Beverly Jo Taylor was killed after her throat was slashed by an inmate. And when a tragic incident like this occurs, it often exposes significant and systemic issues with mismanagement, policy failures, and control gaps. The victim's husband won a lawsuit against the state of Ohio because of appropriate security measures were not in place to protect staff. Institution morale and confidence are shaken because of homicide, especially a staff member. It's not supposed to happen.
Hey, everybody. Pete Bludworth with Corrections Unfiltered, podcast where corrections meets conversation. Before we get going tonight, please do me a favor. Please hit like. Please hit subscribe. Please share our content. And remember, once we post this out there, let's make sure we get some comments because we're not going to be able to touch on every subject. And you are able to bring some information in that helps the conversation get going. The podcast that we're going to have is going to be about the Lucasville Riot that took place in 1993. Now, throughout corrections history, there have been certain riots that have shaped the way that corrections across the country is managed and laws that are going to be put into place. So we're going to focus on what happened before the Lucasville Riot. What were some of the identifiers that we now can see with our 2010 hindsight that we're able to address to make sure that it doesn't happen again? This is not a blame game. We are not going to be pointing fingers at anybody. We're not going to say it happened because of this person or happened because of that. We're going to go back to the factual information so that we can discuss it. So let's get into this podcast. Well, hey, everybody, I'm back, and we have a great cast tonight. Chris McConnell, how you doing, sir?
Hey, how's everyone doing?
Good.
And Rick Harnes, how you doing?
Hey, Pete. How's everybody doing? Glad to be here.
And last but not least, Charlie Bueno. How are you?
Good. How's everybody doing? Glad to be here tonight also.
So, Rick, you had talked about in the past, talking about prison riots and the things that, took place before, during, after, how it shaped and formed corrections. And so we talked about it. You wanted to start with Lucasville. What was it about this particular riot that you wanted to do a deep dive on?
Lucasville being one of probably the top 5 riots that in correctional history in my time found that it's always been a good learning tool for anybody involved in corrections, anybody interested in corrections, or anybody that's just a history buff of corrections. And Lucasville also is one of those riots that has been overlooked because it took place at the same time the Branch Davidian situation was unfolding down in Waco, Texas.
Yeah.
And so it got lost in the shuffle. Nobody saw what was going on. And I can say from my time in the Bureau, I lost track of it too, because we were 100% focused on what was going on down there in Waco. But I've been yammering on about this because I find that what's happened in the past, the bad things, not because people are bad, but because of bad things that happen, that they're learning tools. We have the ability to take those things, dissect them, turn them on all their sides, and use them as training tools for not just new staff coming into a job, but staff that have been at it for a while that may have forgotten how bad things can get, or got a little complacent, which we all do. It's a reminder. It's something to revisit and kind of slap us in the face and say, wake up. This may be going on right in front of your eyes, and you not make note of it. You might miss something.
There is a fine line in prison management between total chaos and peace and harmony. That's what I think. And so that's why it's very important to go back and look at these, because you're right. If we can take a look at what took place and we put the proper things in place, hopefully we can prevent them from happening again. But it's not an easy road to toe. It definitely isn't.
Fortunately, riots, and in some cases, major riots have taken place in our correctional history. And major riots are defined as violent, where a significant number of inmates take control of a large portion of a facility for a prolonged period of time, and characterized by total institution disruption, often involving hostages, intense property damage, serious injuries, and death. Although the practice of incarceration has existed for centuries, in the past 50 years, like Rick mentioned, I think 3 major prison riots take center stage. And that's 1, the 1971 Attica riot in New York; 2, the 1980 New Mexico State Penitentiary riot; and for our discussion today, the 1993 Lucasville riot in Ohio. Now, riots don't start suddenly. When major riots of this magnitude take place, the pressure has been building for years.
What is some of the information you all have found as far as led up to this incident?
The overcrowding of the facility. That to me, like that to me stood out in the gangs, and just the racial tension that was going on. But today, you've been yourself in and out of so many facilities. We still see that a lot. When you go into a facility and you get embedded in it and you've been there for a while, you kind of see the same pattern. But why did this, go and end up in a riot when could have possibly few things could have been changed to maybe curb this whole situation?
Charlie mentioned it, overcrowding. Remember in the 1990s, incarceration rates exploded because of the tough on crime initiatives. We had the war on drugs. We had the 1994 crime bill, which had harsher sentences and mandatory minimums and laws requiring that inmates serve, 85% of their time. And Lucasville was overcrowded. One inmate cell intended for one occupant had two occupants. Operating a facility beyond its intended capacity is a recipe for disaster. Say a facility has a rated capacity of 1,000 inmates, but the institution total was 1,500 inmates. That particular institution is operating 500 inmates beyond intended capacity. Being in corrections for 30 years, I can tell you firsthand, overcrowding leads to a constant, high-tension environment, period. I can vividly recall working as a correctional officer in a housing unit. Our housing units had 64 two-person cells, so that's 128 inmates per housing unit. When the unit was full, say between 120, 128 inmates, the tension was always sky high. The lack of personal space, the lack of privacy, it led to conflict.
Yeah.
If the unit had, say, 110 inmates, you could literally feel the contrasting difference.
It's a big thing too, because what happens is idleness. You have 500 more inmates, but you don't have 500 more jobs, classroom opportunities. You don't have the facilities to keep them busy. And we always know idle hands is the devil's workshop, and it always plays out that way, especially in corrections. So that extra 500 affected so many things. It affected everything within that facility.
Yeah. And right from the very beginning, double bunking inmates, the first problem I remember happening was inmate wanted to know why he's bunking with me. Why aren't you bunking him, 2 cells down with somebody else? Right from the very beginning, when they started double bunking, it started animosity from Jump Street. The minute they came into the unit, you could just see the level go up, in that instance.
But as we know, you're operating your facility. Say you're the warden or you're a CO. It doesn't matter. When they tell you that you're getting a new bus full of inmates, and 38 to 40 inmates at a time, and there's not one bus, but there's several buses coming, you got to find a place to put these guys, because whoever's up the chain of command from you isn't trying to hear that you don't have enough room. You'll tell them, all my beds are full. They'll say, put bunks in the gymnasium, put bunks in the TV room. You got facilities out there welding bunks from scratch. They got angle iron and they got sheet iron, and they're putting bunks together. So the general public, they hear the term overcrowding all the time. Every one of these riots, the common denominator is overcrowding, understaffing. Staff will always scream there's never enough staff, no matter how much they're staffed. And inmates will always be overcrowded, no matter how uncrowded it may be. But usually they are overcrowded. When I, like Chris, when I started at Lompoc, it was overcrowded. I didn't even know it was overcrowded because I didn't know shit from Shinola. I was just like, I guess this is the way it's supposed to look. And I looked at the old photos from the riot in Lucasville, the same exact floor plan. We had one unit that was supposed to have single cell, same thing, 6 foot wide, 9 feet deep, I think is what the dimensions of the cell were. And there was designed for one inmate, and we had 2 in there. And the only ones, there was a few select cells that were single cell, and that's where the king shit of Turd Island was the grand poobah in the unit, and that's where that guy got housed. But everybody else was double bunk, and like Charlie says, everybody thought that they garnered a single bunk status. So, but you get what you get. You have buses rolling up with inmates. We had like Chris alluded to, when the war on drugs and the sentencing guidelines changing, prisons were getting packed to the rafters in the in our arena. They were packed until after the 95 riots.
Yeah, and we often talk about the cell occupancy. Well, instead of having one person there, you have two. But now, like Chris pointed out, you have 500 total. So now your chow hall has to run longer. Your movements have to run longer. Your recreation areas were set for a certain population. Now there's more. So that's going to change your recreation schedules. You have the whole prison gets affected by it. Sewage, right? It's designed for sewage for so many people, such a size chow hall and things of that nature. Now there's more people using that. Overcrowding does affect quite a bit, and it can raise those tensions because, like you said, Rick, when you take away the TV rooms and you start taking away recreational areas to put more bunks in them, or you take out a cell so you can create larger space and you have a communal bathroom now, and then you mix different people who have different hygiene practices, the tension just starts flaring up like that.
About 3 years prior to the 1993 Lucasville riot, a 32-year-old female prison teacher by the name of Beverly Jo Taylor was killed after her throat was slashed by an inmate. And when a tragic incident like this occurs, it often exposes significant and systemic issues with mismanagement, policy failures, and control gaps. Case in point, the victim's husband won a lawsuit against the state of Ohio because of appropriate security measures were not in place to protect staff. Institution morale and confidence are shaken because of homicide, especially a staff member. It's not supposed to happen. Make no mistake about one thing, though. Homicides in prisons are not isolated incidents. What do I mean by that? After a homicide, a deep, thorough review will always reveal red flags, subtle warnings, continuous stressors, and dangerous tension.
Yeah, and Chris, I bring up 1990, did a little deep dive in some of the history of the penitentiaries there in Ohio, and they had at this same facility at Lucasville, in 1983, they had one of their factory foremen was murdered by an inmate. He was supervising the sheet metal factory, and so he lost his life at that. You look at systems, especially one particular facility, and you have these horrible incidents happen where staff are murdered. As a new or old officer there, staff member that's well seasoned or brand new, I think that it can become just, well, this is part of the job, and this can happen, and which can sometimes lead to not a but maybe a sense of complacency or acceptance of certain things. And I think when we accept certain things and say, well, that's just the way it is, then we can kind of run into some problems with that in corrections.
Some inmates will even take advantage of that, knowing that history exists, and say things to staff like, well, you don't want to have happen to you what happened to so-and-so. Our staff, for whatever reason, don't report that. No, for whatever reason, maybe they feel intimidated by the inmate. Maybe they think that it's not something that should be reported or reportable. There seems to be some disconnect in them telling somebody, hey, these people are making these comments. Some inmates are fishing for what staffs they can manipulate into allowing them to break the rules, not search their cell, not remove their contraband. And that's the kind of a conditioning thing that they use. And some of them will reach back to those incidents and say, well, you don't want to have that happen to you, do you? So maybe you should just sit in your office while we take care of things out here.
Absolutely. You're always going to have a certain amount of population, and they're usually they show their head from time to time with regularity, and it's they step right up to the line, right to the edge where you're not quite sure that that it's a reportable incident, or you just you don't feel it's worth it. Either you take it seriously or you don't, and that's when they're feeling you out. They're seeing what they can get away with. But going back to these serious incidents where staff lost their life, it's just an indicator that there's a lot of incidents where the staff member didn't die. So you have lots of staff in correctional history that have been, disfigured, their life ruined. Yeah.
Yes.
And they don't make the papers, and there are factors going on that can kind of be lost because it doesn't end up in murder, so it doesn't hit the papers.
So how do you communicate to staff and tell them that is serious stuff to report and convince them to do it? And that's the key. How do you convince them to do it?
There again, that's communication training. Your leaders talking to you, and just like Pete said, if you think it's a reportable incident, don't keep your mouth shut. Report it, because you don't see what you haven't stopped, but you see not reporting something, you could see the outcome. So, good judgment, I would say, is a good example. And just, like I said, it comes kind of to training and the way you're talked to by your superiors. There's just, and you said it, an assault isn't brought out like a murder.
Yeah.
But one leads into the other. So
scares the staff too. Scares your staff. We just have to convince our staff that that's the type of stuff you need to tell us about, so we can get ahead of it, not be behind it.
Yeah. Like Chris always says, consistency.
Yeah. Serving in corrections is not for everybody. Some people are just not comfortable in a correctional environment, especially in higher security institutions. A small element of staff, unfortunately, do work in fear. What do I mean? It's easier for some staff to let the inmates do mostly whatever they want, as long as they're not physically hurting anyone. In other words, they look the other way, no institutional enforcement of basic rules, and then they rationalize their decision. The path of least resistance, so to speak. You give an inmate an inch, they take a mile. That's prison. This behavior is what I call learned behavior. Inmates learn what others get away with, and then they repeat that same behavior. And this creates an extremely dangerous environment, because when a strict officer enforces the rules, or when a new administration comes in and enforces the rules, you get resistance from the inmate population. And now that resistance is part of the pressure cooker. Like Charlie said, how do we contain it? How do we manage it? This is where that leadership, communication, and the firm, fair, and consistent concept comes into play.
The Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections installed a new warden out there. And he's got a fantastic podcast out there where he talks about the incident. And they were saying that the inmate population was not really going along with, or was not wanting him to implement, strict procedures, and they were like controlled movement and things of that nature. Did you get the same information?
That's what I got. Looking at all the information I could find, that's what they wanted. They wanted somebody to come in there, change things. Somebody came in with what I would consider a good practices, good correctional practices, things that would be, I would call them standard operating procedure in a high security prison. And sometimes, if there's a change, especially if you're the new guy on the block, I don't care if you're the warden or a new CO, there's going to be some pushback to that. It's just natural. This is not the way we do it here. That's never been done that way before here, yada, yada, yada. So there could be this subtle to overt resistance that could go on. Absolutely.
I mean, it's clear, and what I've read is that, the warden came in and tried to get kind of back on track, and he met a lot of resistance because the way the prison was run up to that point was, to be perfectly honest, because kind of chaotic. The inmates thought they were running the prison, not the warden. That's what it sounds like to me anyway. And then, he came in and he tried to butt heads with everybody, and one thing led to another.
He wasn't a new warden. He wasn't new to corrections. He had a tenured history and had a successful history and career, making his way up to that rank, and was very well respected. So he shows up, sees the things that are going on. You had a homicide 3 years ago that identified that you have some security-based issues. You've got these overpopulation going on, power struggles going on between the inmate populations and the gangs, and you have all this stuff happening. So the slightest little rule change, especially with, in my opinion, with that type of population, if your staff are not on board with doing this with you, it could be that final trigger. It could be that final trigger. And that's a tough one.
After a staff homicide with known widespread failures, new leadership will be forthcoming. And leadership starts with the warden, and he or she will bring new rules. And restoring order, being strict, enforcing accountability, that's okay. However, Pete, as you mentioned, wardens must do two things first in order to avoid a common mistake. One, they must have buy-in from the staff. And two, they must effectively communicate every single change. Believe me, inmates will bitch about each and every change, but when you explain it, it's somewhat easier to accept. On the flip side, when you make changes and force it down their throat, so to speak, without explanation, it will only add to the steam of the pressure cooker.
My experience has been the interpretation of how it was received is going to be based upon the people who misbehave, right? They're going to come along and say, well, we did this because that happened. Or how about you just did that because it's your nature? How about you just did that because there was a power struggle internally with the inmate population? So I've always thought it was grandiose when inmates would misbehave and do things as a collective unit, whether it's, 3 or 4 guys beating up on a couple, or it's a large scale thing, because we've all been involved in riots too, unfortunately. And they'll always point back and say, but it's because of this, and this wasn't communicated right. Or how about this? You just didn't want to hear it, and there was enough loud voices to get something going.
So a little bit to that. So we look at Lucasville. Lucasville came on board 72, 73 after they shut down the original penitentiary, which was in Columbus, Ohio. And so you've got a new culture. You got a new area, new prison, probably a lot of changes in staff that happened at that time. So you had basically 20 years to develop for the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility, known to us as Lucasville, to kind of gain its own head of steam. I can speak to a couple of places that I'm familiar with that were started up, penitentiaries that were started up, and if they don't get started the right way, as we know, we call them new activations, right? If you don't get them done, if you don't start them exactly the right way and ease them into, it kind of is what Chris is talking about. If you don't ease into them the right way, if you don't start out right, you have a hard time getting things back to where they are. And it's you can't just come in and say, this is the way it's done right. Yes, we know this is the way it's done right, but it's got to be done incrementally, strategically. You've got to get the staff to buy into it first. Then you can get the inmates to buy into it. But we're not to bash. I don't want to bash Lucasville.
No.
But if you've got something that's already a problem, and like this new warden coming in has been handed, and we know how it is. They're cleanup guys, Place goes off the rails. Let's get P.W. Cohen to go over here and clean it up, or whatever the new names are now. And I'm sure that that's what Warden Tate's role was in this thing. But it's got to be done incrementally, because you may have developed a culture at a place that says, this is the norm. This is how we do things here. And we know that's not right, but do they know it's not right? And has it gone so far? I went to one facility that was having trouble, and I can tell you without any question that the staff couldn't wait for us to leave, because they wanted to go back to doing things the way they were doing them, which were absolutely wrong, but they were work. It was work. And they didn't want to get sideways with the inmates, because they knew the inmates were going to be running things again when we left.
Yeah.
And some of that goes on too. And those are things that, it's survival. Now you're just in survival mode. The staff are just trying to survive the next change, because they know at the end of the day, they're not going to be allowed to run things the way they're supposed to be run. So there's a lot of things that go into this. I don't know all the ins and outs of it. I don't know any of us are going to know the ins and outs of what was going on at Lucasville in 1993, but definitely something was amiss. There was a few things missed, and it turned out the worst possible outcome you could have.
My kind of question is for you guys: is you come into a facility that's in a bad way, like they were when you walked in the door to be the savior, and you're trying to get back to normal operations, and like you said, get your staff behind you to support what you're doing and get the facility back on track. That has to be just overwhelming as a warden.
We're not saying that the warden at that time was not doing those things. We're not saying that he came in and was trying to push a lot of things without the support. I think Chris has said it before in other podcasts. If you're not walking and talking with your staff,
absolutely,
on all shifts, weekends, and some holidays, you're not managing your facility. The facility is being managed by the inmates. What do you say, Chris?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, even at my last assignment, I think it ran pretty well, but it was a very violent institution. So, our job was to reduce the violence. And it was hard. It was a lot of walking, a lot of talking, not only with the staff, but with the inmates. I was in the institution most days. The inmates had full access to me. I think that did make a good difference. But we had to implement things like, I called it Operation Pat Search, where I'd grab 20, 30 staff. We'd go in a unit and pat down the inmates. Why? To take off weapons off the inmates. We all know that, when there's a physical altercation, and when there's going to be physical altercations in prison, we like to keep it with fists, not with metal. Metal being, homemade shanks, stabbings out type of thing. So we did that often. And if I could prosecute, I would prosecute. We made sure the cameras were on so we could prosecute, just things like that. So, we really tried to get a handle on it. But again, what we did initially was just communicate with the staff and the inmates, get the buy-in.
And there's that constant temperature testing, what you say, Rick, where you're always trying to listen. Like, that's why you're there, because you have a gut feeling on how things are going to go. And so you're always trying to assess and be present in the moment to make a decision on whether or not you're going in the direction you want to go in, or things just aren't happening the way that you want them to.
Absolutely. You kind of get this, I don't know what it is, another sense to where you walk into a housing unit and you can sense whether things are right or wrong. Walk into an inmate dining room and you know whether things are going right or wrong. Mm-hmm. You can walk the yard. I don't have to be up in the tower and get an aerial view and see what's going on. I can tell whether things look right or whether things are getting ready to kick off. So if you're not, it's like Chris has said, if you're not walking and talking, if you don't know your inmates and your inmates don't know, and if you're not present, and if you're not getting the inmates used to being pat searched, they should feel like at any given moment that they're going to be pat searched, that you're not going to depend on metal detectors that are around your unit, around the institution to take care of your weapons recovery system. You're doing it by hand, old school. Then things are going to go bad if you don't do that.
And it's sad to say, but a lot of times older staff who want things just to flow right without doing those types of things try to convince the younger staff not to do it. And that sets that culture you talk about. And that's why they bring in wardens to fix things, because staff have to know pat search is just a normal routine thing that's going to either discover or limit the movement of contraband. And that's what we use it for. But it gets pushed over by that officer who says, yeah, well, when you do that, you just stir things up. These guys respect me and they'll never do stuff like that. They are. Trust me, they are.
Yeah. I was going to say, on the flip side of that, the inmates are also doing the same to the staff that walks in, whether you're warden, captain, lieutenant. They know how to act accordingly when you walk into that housing unit. They know you're give them what they deserve, not what they want, and fair, firm, and consistent. They know you and how that unit's going to act when you walk into that unit by yourself or with other staff. They know you, just like you should know them.
Right before the riot, there was a TB test, a mandatory TB test that was going to come through that the state was requiring. So it had to be done. It wasn't one of these things where, well, I guess we don't have to. And it had to be 100%. All inmates had to participate. And once that decision was made, from what I read, there was communication to the inmate population, and a certain population, the Muslim population, stepped up and said, we're not going to do this, and there's nothing going to make us. Did you guys get the same information?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yep.
And we had run into that in my experience with the Bureau of Prisons. The inmates had it in their mind that there was either alcohol or some derivative of pork in the TB test. It was a skin prick test where they injected a small amount of fluid under the skin and looked for a reaction. And there was I don't remember how the Bureau worked it out. I think they ended up with X-rays, but they wouldn't take the test. It was a violation of their religious rights.
Yeah, and what I researched and found out was that, the warden did all the things beforehand to notify the inmate population, try to address their concerns, verified that this alcohol that they felt was going to be in this test, was present, try to communicate to make sure that the inmates were going to be on board with doing it. And then a plan was being formulated. For what I found was before the Easter, the warden meets with a group of people and says, all right, next week we're going to shut down on Monday or whatever day of the week they're going to shut down. And we're going to begin this TB test, and it's going to be 100%. And then we will deal with our challenges as they come along. Somebody goes back and speaks to an inmate orderly or an inmate porter and says, hey, we have to make sure we have enough supplies to be able to go through a lockdown next week, do our inventory, and check and see if we're all right. Once you tell one person, you've just told the rest, and that person goes out and informs the population the test is coming. Did you guys read about that?
Yes.
Yep. They had the presence of thousands of paper bags for bag meals and a verbal overhear of staff members talking about an impending lockdown. So there was definitely, the word was out.
What I read too was the Muslims asked for a different kind of tests besides that TB test, and the facility refused. They said, that's what you're getting, that's what you're going to take, and we're not changing it.
A lot of times when the inmates make those types of demands, especially on something like a test like that, back in 1994, there might not have been a alternative the facility could incorporate. So I don't know what was going on back then. I'm not exactly sure what they were demanding to be the alternative route of doing this, but they might have picked something that was just totally impossible for the facility to pull off.
The disturbing thing that popped up for me, and in my world would be very significant, is recreation staff observing the yard, and noticed that the Muslim inmates and the Aryan Brotherhood inmates were on the rec pile, about 60 of them, having a kind of a powwow, what I would call a powwow, group meeting. That's significant in that rarely do you ever see those two groups getting together and discussing anything. And you can assume that they're not talking about the latest soap opera or what's on the local news. They're talking about something going on inside the prison. Either they're coming to some sort of an agreement on a beef, or there's something else brewing. So there was a major sign going on that, by my understanding, never made it to the warden's office.
And I guarantee if the warden, with the tenure that he has, if he had heard about something like that, there would have been a whole lot of attention paid to that meeting that took place on that rec yard. And there would have been a whole lot of lack of movement in that facility after hearing about it.
This is my perspective as a CO. It all depends on who the CO was watching that little powwow go down, to where, okay, maybe they weren't seasoned enough to see that was out of the norm.
Then the final trigger takes place, and that final trigger is that TB test. And once that gets put in place and the inmate population believes they have to act out, Easter Sunday, they make a decision to do something that's going to change corrections in the United States forever. So that's what is going to be on the next podcast. We're going to talk about, those first few days of that particular riot, because there's a lot of information that we can talk about during that time. But we have to know what were the things before that have been identified to be the catalyst. Not pointing a finger at anybody. What we're talking about is these were the events that took place. And we all know that people can skew the conversation to the direction they want it to go in. So on behalf of Corrections Unfiltered, hey guys, thanks for coming tonight. I hope that we're going to get people subscribing. I hope that people will like this, and I hope they will share it and put some comments, because we get to find out what you're thinking. You bring up the things that we didn't get to, and that's what's important. And that's why we want to do this with Corrections Unfiltered. So, Hey guys, thanks so much for this conversation. I look forward to us getting together and talking about the next one.
Thanks, Pete.
Likewise, look forward to it.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thanks, guys.